Welcome to episode 10 of The Coin Pod, a weekly podcast featuring conversations with individuals who build, study, and use Bitcoin. I'm your host, Zach Bull. The problems of questionable, sometimes outright false data appearing on popular coin ranking sites like CoinMarketCap.com and subsequently causing significant price fluctuations is only one layer of the to date somewhat underdeveloped sphere of coin ranking sites and data aggregation services within the cryptocurrency space. One team taking this segment of the space head on is behind Nomics.com, an open, professional, reliable source for clean, carefully curated cryptocurrency data. For this coin pod, I chatted with Nomics CEO Clay Collins about his work and its unique relevance to anyone holding a modicum of curiosity for cryptocurrency. Hopefully listening to our conversation allows you to learn as much as I did from having it with Clay. This was an incredibly fun, informative episode to produce for sure. Without further delay, here's Clay. Clay, thanks so much for coming on the show today. This should be a great conversation. Thanks for being here.
Zach, thanks for having me. I'm excited about the dialogue that we're about to have.
Before we get into your work and sort of the meat of our conversation, coin ranking and data sites are sort of, in my opinion, a much more niche area of cryptocurrency. Can you tell us a little bit how maybe you got into Bitcoin, but then more specifically how you got into this area of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency specifically?
Sure, yeah. So my journey starts in early 2013. So at the time, I was the CEO of a marketing technology company called Lead Pages. At the time, we had raised $38 million in venture capital. We were about 200 people in size, and that was a really great experience. But around that time, I was making just through my salary more than I ever had my entire life, and I started allocating a portion of that before it ever hit my bank account to Bitcoin and Bitcoin investing. And this was after the big Mt. Gox crash. And I really enjoyed, participating in the space that way. And I found myself going to sites like CoinCap.io and CoinMarketCap and all these various pricing sites. And it struck me that what was happening there, it just could be a lot better. I saw coins ranking in the top 10 that, had no business being there. I saw data that I found to be somewhat faulty. I saw things like, randomly data from Korean exchanges was dropped. Like there was so much happening in that space on top of just sort of the level of professionalization in this space was low. Like most of those sites, just looking at this from a product person, which I am, most of these sites didn't have terms of service. They didn't have privacy policies. They didn't have contact us pages. Like you literally could not find out who ran those websites. And it just struck me that if we were going to build an infrastructure for $1 trillion plus economy, our data and the presentation of that data really needed to come up. So as an entrepreneur, I think I know what my sweet spot is. It's really between like 0 and about 20 million in annual recurring revenue. Lead Pages, the company I was running at the time, got beyond that. And I felt like I was really no longer operating in my zone of genius. So the board and I hired our current COO, a guy named John Tedesco, to be the new CEO of the company. I moved to the position of board chairman and co-founded Nomics with someone whose company I was trying to buy at the time. And it was one of the acquisitions we made at Lead Pages was a marketing automation platform. We were also looking to acquire a webinar platform and decided not to do that. But I liked one of these platforms so much that I just began talks with that person about doing the next thing. And this is really the area that we found most interesting for so many reasons. There was a professionalization opportunity. There was an opportunity to index the entire cryptosphere. So like what I find most interesting about what Google does is not their algorithms. It's pretty easy. I don't want to say easy, but if you get enough smart people together on the data science front, you can do a lot of what Google does on the searching front. What's hard about what Google does is the fact that they index the entire web multiple times a day. And so from a data perspective, it struck me that while it's possible to index every trade and every order in the cryptosphere right now, doing that even 3 years from now would be an incredibly daunting thing to do, and like there would be a moat that you could build around that. So we wanted to start sooner rather than later. So anyway, that's kind of the origin story in a nutshell.
Up until a couple days ago, I wasn't super familiar with Nomics, and I actually came across it in a Twitter conversation with Zuko and Nick and yourself and a couple other people chatting about CoinMarketCap and CoinMetrics and OnChainFX and all of these other coin ranking sites. But I'm curious to hear, I mean, everyone knows CoinMarketCap. That's, for better or worse, that's just sort of the go-to. They have the biggest brand at the moment. But when you were building Nomics, what did you see in these other sites, and some more specifics on things that you knew could be done much, much better?
Yeah, so that's a great point. So I think the first thing is really just around professionalization of the space. So things like having a phone number, which we list on our homepage, our phone number, having a terms of service, having a privacy policy, having a contact us page, doing things like even appearing on podcasts like this. I have not heard the founders of any of those sites talking, presenting at conferences, participating in the conversation that's being had. Like, this is a community, and communities require participation. So I think, that, and, we're a Delaware LLC, where this isn't a side project. This isn't a nights and weekends thing. So I think the first thing is just general professionalization. I think the next thing is around advertising. So we don't promote scamming ICOs. We're actually not taking money in any shape or form right now. We're self-funded. I think the next thing, and this is a minor point, but I think it's important, is speed. So there's some interesting websites that allow you to compare page speed of various pages. We beat them all right now in terms of page load speed. We're also I think in terms of mobile responsive design, I think we do well there. In terms of branding, I think we have some interesting things going on, but those aren't huge things. They're just kind of nice to haves. I think a big one is transparency. So we have an article on our blog talking about how we calculate pricing data. No one else, to my knowledge, has written about that at length. We also talk about how we calculate all-time high. And again, no one else has spoken about that at length. If you go to Nomics and you hover over an all-time high figure, we won't just tell you what the all-time high is. We'll tell you which exchange that all-time high happened on, and what date it happened on, and the currency pair. Like, we'll tell you the actual market that the all-time high was logged in at. So I think transparency is another big piece of what we do. I think on the back end, it's important to talk about the level of data that we have. So we're not just collecting candle data, OHLC data from exchanges. We're logging every single trade when we can. So I think, having looked at these data sets, I believe we have the cleanest data set on the back end. And there's just not a lot of funky business happening there, which is pretty unique. I also think we can differentiate on engineering. We have 100% front end and back end unit test coverage, which, if you're an engineer, you probably know what that is. But we're not screwing around on our engineering. And then I think there's the traditional feature war, which we're happy to participate in. Right now we're pretty early on in the development of our website. We only have one page with an index. I think probably most people go there and say, hey, they're thinking about this in some interesting ways. But sort of, I think the full realization of our vision we're not anywhere close to that. And we have a long ways to go. So we will be coming out with pages for individual currencies, for individual markets, for individual exchanges. And then there's a lot of metadata we can provide about that. For example, if we know the trade volume for a given exchange and we know the kind of fees they charge, we can actually report revenues for these exchanges. So there's so many things like that. That's just the tip of the iceberg of the kind of things that we think we can do with the data that we have. So I think I think the feature war is sort of coming, but in terms of how we're set up, I think that provides a pretty good overview.
For any of our listeners who want to work with the things that Clay just mentioned, you can go to nomics.com and see what he just explained. Clay, I'm curious, without getting too much in the weeds, if you could talk with me a little bit about some of the back end on the data that you accumulate, because I guess there's two very discrete, although I guess they overlap in some ways, but two very discrete sort of sets, demographics of people who visit these sites. You have the relatively newer, much more solidly retail investors who are just looking for two things: A, how much is it? And B, where can I buy it? And don't really pay much mind to the back end that you were just sort of explaining on how the numbers that they're seeing on the screen are calculated, where they come from. And then much more professional investors who actually care about that due diligence and all the processes that you described. Can you tell us a little bit about what sets you apart in that back end data?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think that's an important bifurcation. There really are two groups that we're targeting. The first is the institutional investors. So hedge funds, family offices, multifamily offices, high net worth individuals that have budgets for things like data and perhaps employ an engineer, perhaps part-time or full-time. And those folks, their needs really fall into one of two buckets. The first bucket is just professionalization. So they're looking, most people, if they're getting data in this space, they've experienced APIs that go up and down, ticker symbols that change pretty frequently, data schemas that change pretty frequently, high latency when trying to get historic trades. So if you want to get something that happened pretty recently from an exchange, it doesn't take a ton of time. But if you want to go back a few years, it can take a lot more time. But just general wonkiness. And those hedge funds are finding that they intended to use their engineers and their engineering resources for identifying opportunities, but instead these engineers are spending almost all of their time just maintaining the connections to these APIs and cleaning up data sets. And it's more like janitorial work than gold mining, right? So that's an area where we're different, right? Like you can just go to our API and get pretty high fidelity data from one fire hose, and we handle we have uptime guarantees, we have response time guarantees. You can call us, we're available to you, and it's just really clean data with a modern REST API that conforms to best practices. For a lot of these exchanges, that isn't their first priority, is maintaining their API. Their first priority is like not going down and scaling support and a whole bunch of other things. So that's sort of that first bucket of institutional investor need, is just clean data and professionalization of the tools they use to make decisions. I think the second bucket that these institutional investors have needs in is related to their thesis. So if they might be they might have a sentiment fund, or they might have a quantitative fund, or an algorithmic trading fund, or maybe they have some sort of thesis around correlations. And so they might say to us, hey, we're looking for these sentiment indicators, or, can you get this to us? Or we're looking for a correlations endpoint. So, we believe that this crypto asset goes up before this other crypto asset, or we want you to help us identify these correlations. And for, we're really focused on that first bucket, just sort of the general cleanup and professionalization of the space. And we will probably get into that second bucket a little bit later, but we think it's important to nail the boring basics. And I think in a world where everyone is so focused on, sort of like what's new and what's possible in the future and all kinds of things that have never existed before, we think the space has actually failed pretty miserably on nailing the fundamentals when it comes to data. So we're just, again, we want to be really good at the boring basics before we start getting into all kinds of other fancy things, which there'll always be time for that. So that's on the institutional investor side. On the front end side, I think it's a lot more basic. It's about speed. It's about reliability. It's about knowing that we aren't taking any money from crypto projects, so we're not screwing you. We're not being intentionally. We're not reporting fraudulent data intentionally. We're publishing our methodologies. When we can, like, for example, around ATH, we're telling you where we're getting this data from, how we're getting it. So that's what's occurring on the front end, side. I don't know what more to add on that. I will say that, as a product person, I think there is a dangerous no man's land that exists where you start building a lot of esoteric tools on the front end for really sophisticated retail investors that don't necessarily have budget. So you can end up in a place where you have a bunch of things on the front end, and now your site is really overly complex and hard to digest, and it's not really clear who needs what or why. And then you neglect your data set, or you don't put as much time to your API. So we want to be really great for consumers, and we want to be really great for institutional investors. But if you're looking to correlate NVT score with netoid functions, and you want to do it on the front end with a few clicks on the browser, that probably isn't going to be something we want, that we're going to do in the next month or two, because we just have so many other things that we think come before that, like accessibility and exchange intelligence and fraud detection and all these other things. And it's not even clear yet that NVT score is a good predictor of price movement. And so I think, again, people are really attracted to shiny objects in this space, even before it's proven that that these are meaningful signals and indicators. So if we did add NVT, we'd want to make sure that it's actually there's published data showing that it accurately predicts things. But before we'd show it, just because it's interesting and neat, that's cool. But we want to see a bit more before we take action.
I do have one question with regard to the coins, the actual coins and tokens and that sort of thing that you list on your site. Because if we pull up CoinMarketCap.com for a minute, they have a substantially larger number of coins listed. And I think on your site right now, you have approximately 500 or so, give or take 50 or something. Can you walk me through why you don't list as many coins as CoinMarketCap, how you pick which coins to list and that sort of thing?
Yeah, it's really just a function of time. So the way services like ours work is it's not about listing individual tokens. So a lot of times we'll get emails, and we want to get them. Please give them to us. We have a contact us form. Contact us. Call us, tweet at us. I respond to every single email at this point. I don't know if that's going to be possible into the future, but I respond to every single tweet and email. And people say why don't you list this token? Why don't you list that token? And so that really comes down to exchanges. So the only way to get a price for a token is to list markets that include that token on an exchange. So everything you're seeing on the front page is the result of rolling up data on various markets on various exchanges. So we have exchanges that cover 80% of the volume in the space, and we will be getting the long tail, but it's just not time now. So the other day, someone was like, "Why don't you have the maker the MKR coin, and it's because it's not trading on major exchanges yet, and we'll add them. We're just not there yet. So it's coming. It's just like everything else on the roadmap. It takes time, and it takes even more time to do it right. So yeah, it's coming.
Gotcha. I might actually link to this Twitter thread in the show notes. But Nick and Zuku, chatting about these different ranking sites, sort of brought up the idea of building a site and focusing on the depth of the information produced and that sort of thing versus the breadth of user experience and acquisition and vitality and reliability of the site and all of that sort of thing. But some of the comments that you've made about how Nomics is being built sort of works as a counterpoint to that like stiff bifurcation of those two strategies. I'm curious to hear your take on those sort of two strategies that Zuku and Nick were chatting about, and how Nomics is approaching the breadth of the data that it provides in addition to the breadth of the audience that it's trying to reach.
I really don't think there's a trade-off between breadth and depth. I think it sort of makes logical sense that there would be, but our goal is to ingest data from the space at scale. So, at some point we will probably have a full-time person who all they do full-time is integrate exchanges, and we'll get them all. We'll have all the data, and hiring that person doesn't come at the cost of things like analysis and, on-chain data points and on-chain signals. So I don't think it's a trade-off. I do think it's important to be really clear about who your customer personas are and what you get by accommodating them. So I think that on one hand, you have the folks who can actually pay money, people who have budgets for data and data sets. So those are, institutional investors, hedge funds, high net worth individuals, people with, active trading strategies, and to some extent, people with more passive strategies. But really institutional investors. And so you've got to make sure that you get those folks what they need if you want to sell to them. And then on the other hand, you've got this mass market that's generally interested in the space, Coinbase users, people who want to check up on the price of their favorite token. And what they want is they want to make sure that whatever they're invested in, like if they use your site on a daily basis, they don't have to navigate away to get the price of that coin. And if they want to buy it, they need to know where they can buy it. And they want to know other things as well. I think you can end up in a dangerous position where you're building a front-end site, right? So it's not meant for consumption by institutional investors, but you're building a front-end site, and you can get increasingly sophisticated, and you can end up in this no man's land where you've built something that's for like really sophisticated individual investors who don't have data budgets. And there's like not a lot of these people in the world. So like Zuku and Nick and some of these other people are like, Nick runs the VC arm or works with the VC arm at Fidelity. Zoku is not a professional investor. He runs Zcash. So these are like super sophisticated people who probably aren't going to spend 5 figures a year on on data. So I think you can get in sort of this middle ground, no man's land, where you've built something that like really seems cool, but like there's no way that you're going to monetize it. And certainly we want to build that stuff. But that's probably the third persona that we're going to go after. So like we're going after mass market, and we're going after institutional investors, and that third category, like we will be able to accommodate them probably through an API at first, and then later through a front end. It's just not the very first priority.
Gotcha. Well, again, for our listeners, you can follow along with everything he's referencing while you're listening by visiting nomics.com. And as soon as you load the front page, something I like is the very first thing you see is the total cryptocurrency market cap highlighted for you, and then a percentage of the value of all the gold in the world represented by that market cap. I'm not a hardcore Bitcoin maximalist. I sort of categorize myself as a soft Bitcoin maximalist. But is that sort of a subliminal message from Nomics that we view cryptocurrency, or maybe Bitcoin in specific, or maybe another cryptocurrency, as a parallel to gold, or a gold 2.0 in a way?
I think it's really a way of just comparing it to something that people understand. So, so we're not Bitcoin maximalists, but I personally am a cryptocurrency maximalist. So I think some form of what's happening here is going to overtake fiat currencies. And that might be 30 years out. Like, we've got to remember, like, Amazon is like 20 to 25 years after its founding. And like, my mom just started using it. So I think this stuff takes a really long time to take hold. And at some point on our dashboard of the space, we're going to show the value of Bitcoin relative to gold, relative to like Apple's valuation, relative to like, we want to like visualize this stuff and make it real. So this kind of sort of pays tribute to what we aspire to do here in terms of making this real for people. If you look at nomics.com on a larger monitor, you'll see a highlight at the top that shows where Bitcoin is relative to other top global currencies. So it shows Bitcoin ranked 7th right now, with the Indian currency and the Japanese yen and the Chinese yuan and the euro and the US dollar above it in terms of circulating supply. So that's another way to try to like contextualize this, is sort of like, here's where Bitcoin ranks relative to everything else. Another thing that we're going to be showing people is something that I think isn't talked about a lot, and it isn't esoteric. Well, I don't know, maybe it is, but we're going to be doing a lot of work around quote currency dominance. So it's really interesting to look at the volume of currencies, but what I think is a bigger signal is sort of the, I guess, unit of account measure of money. So money is defined as being a store of value, a means of exchange, and a unit of account. So when I think of a store of value, I think, like, how do you measure that? How do you operationalize that? I think store of value is best operationalized as market cap. There's a lot of problems with market cap, but it's probably the best we have right now. Means of exchange is probably best operationalized as number of on-chain transactions. So not exchange transactions, but transactions that are native to that cryptocurrency network. And there's also the third, which is unit of account, and that really goes into like how people buy these other currencies. So right now, the biggest market in the cryptocurrency space is BTC to USD. So even though we're all so passionate about cryptocurrencies, the biggest, like the highest volume quote currency is USD. People are buying Bitcoin in USD for the most part, and then getting out of Bitcoin in USD for the most part. So USD still rules this world. Within the Bitcoin world, Bitcoin has the highest quote currency dominance, followed by Ethereum, and then it's like Tether, but that's really interesting to follow. I think the biggest flippening that could happen isn't in market cap. It's really in quote currency volume. But that's a relatively esoteric discussion. But we think about these things a lot, and in general, we think about, like, how do we best represent this space to like my father or mother to a school child, like, there's these cool infographics where you can see like how many school buses you'd have to stack up to reach the bottom of the ocean, right? And I think there's analogies to that in this space where we can make it real for people, and we aspire to do that as much as possible.
That makes a lot of sense. And I agree the quote currency conversation is fascinating, even if a bit more esoteric. But on that note of esoteric conversations and topics, I do want to mention that in addition to all of the data aggregation and API services, Nomics also updates a blog regularly, has a weekly newsletter, and hosts a podcast in addition to customer service and all of these things. And you can find all of that by going to nomics.com. It's displayed there on the homepage. I'm curious, though, you mentioned that Nomics is self-funded, no advertising fees or sponsorship funds or anything like that from questionable projects. But one thing I don't see on your site is are donation addresses that users can contribute to your work. Is that something I'm just missing, or how can we, out of support for the work you're doing, contribute?
Yeah, so great question. We will be adding donation addresses here in the next release of the site. So I appreciate you asking. I imagine at some point we'll probably raise venture capital funding, but it'll be when we want to, and it'll be for strategic reasons rather than because we need the money. So that's really kind of you to ask, and we'll have something there at some point.
I actually did want to ask, though, if you could mention to our listeners where they can keep up with you and your partner and the whole Nomics team, besides the blog, newsletter, and podcast, as things develop and you continue to have these conversations about your data and things happening in the cryptocurrency space. What are the variety of ways that we can follow and keep in touch with you?
I think probably the best way is just to subscribe to our newsletter. We put out a newsletter every 1 to 2 weeks, updating people on the methodologies that we're employing for calculating and displaying our data. We talk about new features that are being added. We talk about kind of how we're thinking about the space and where our head's at, and we want to actively engage with you. So I'd say go to nomics.com and subscribe to the newsletter. I think another way is to subscribe to the podcast. We put out a podcast every 2 weeks. It's tradition. It's almost exclusively been with institutional investors talking about how they look at the space and different business models there. So we've had a conversation with a crypto index fund, which is the Bitwise Investments Hold 10. We've had a conversation with an institutional fund of funds, which takes money and distributes it to multiple hedge funds. We've had a conversation with Kyle Samani from Multicoin Capital, which is kind of a VC-style hedge fund. We just published an episode with a publicly traded masternode company. So we're exploring different business models in the space, and I'm really proud of that content. I think it's one of the most highly produced podcasts in the space, and we put a lot of time and effort into it. In terms of just engaging with us, the best way is probably either through our Telegram group, which we just started like a day or two ago, or through Twitter. We're available on Twitter. Or if you get any email from us, any newsletter, anything, just reply to it. And I'll always reply. I also reply to every single comment that comes in on the blog. So there's a variety of ways to reach us. We want to let the community know that we're here. We want to engage. We want you to know who we are, what we're thinking about things, how we calculate stuff, how we're thinking about our roadmap, and we're extremely open to feedback, to suggestions, and we want you to interact with us. So please do contact us if you have any suggestions or feedback or anything of that nature.
Perfect. We are sort of reaching our time limit here for the episode. Are there any final thoughts you want to share before we wrap it up on Nomics today?
I think the biggest thing to say is like we just hired our fourth person, and please look for a lot of movement from us on the product roadmap. This is a really exciting space. It's a space that we're extremely dedicated to. We're not screwing around, and we're really excited about the future. So let us know if you want to get involved in any way, shape, or form, and we'd love to work out a way to make that happen.
Well, from what we've discussed today, I think not screwing around would be an understatement for sure. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. I can't thank you enough.
Absolutely, Zach. Thanks so much for having me on. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I love talking about this stuff.
This CoinPod has been a production of You, Me, and BTC. Special thanks, as always, to my colleagues Tim Baker and Daniel Brown, and of course to my guest, Clay. Be sure to follow the CoinPod on Twitter @TheCoinPod and message me with any questions, comments, or just to say hi. While you're at it, be sure to follow Clay and Nomics for more information about their work. We'll be back next week with another CoinPod, so until then, cheers.